Fresh from Google Zeitgeist, we have author Jamie Metzl here to talk to us about his latest book, which is called Eternal Sonata. And so in a world where biotechnology has increased the length of human lifespan, people start dying, researchers start dying. What's going on? How can we unravel this mystery? This work of fiction, or is it, is what Jamie will be here to talk to us today. So please join me in welcoming him to Google.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm really delighted to be at Google because for people who are thinking about and writing about the future, it's pretty exciting to be at a company that's actually building the future. So I had a tremendous time at Google Zeitgeist, and I loved working with the outstanding team of the people who put together Zeitgeist. And it's still, I think, not just me, but everybody who participated in that event is still connected to each other, talking to each other, and just full of excitement and enthusiasm because we live in a world that is in a tremendous state of flux. And the challenge that we have, and for a company like Google or for anybody else, is that our brains are designed for linear thinking. That when our ancestors were living on the savannas in Africa, like if your parents were afraid of a tiger, it was pretty good to learn that lesson from your parents and to think, well, I better be afraid of a tiger or a lion too, because the world had a huge amount of consistency. But now we live in a world of exponential change. And it's really difficult for people to internalize what exponential change means and how it applies to them and how it applies to all of us. And because of the great work that you at Google and others have done, we are now at a place where people, in many ways, can internalize Moore's law. And I don't need to explain to the Google audience what Moore's law is, but the law that computing power roughly doubles between 18 and months, every 18 months and 2 years. And that's why we have an expectation now that our iPhones or other technology will get stronger, smaller, better, faster. And that's just, we've just internalized that that's the way the world works. But especially since the end of the Human Genome Project, we have a new information technology, and that information technology is biology. And it's really difficult for people who've already internalized that information technology systems are manipulable and hackable. It's very difficult for them and for all of us to begin to think about what it means that the human biological system, or all biological systems, will be hackable and transformable. And it's a big, big idea because our species has been around for about 4 billion years. And for about 4 billion years, from when we were single-cell organisms until now, multicellular organisms, we've evolved by one set of rules. And it's random mutation and competition. And what happens if we enter a world, which we are entering now, where that's not the primary driver of evolution? It's guided manipulation and guided selection, not natural selection, but guided, managed selection. And what does that mean? One of the reasons why I write novels, among other things, is that we don't know what it means. But it's not just a scientific question. It's not just a policy question. It's an existential human question. Not just what are we going to think about, but what are we going to be as a species in 100, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years. And it's very, very likely that we are going to be a species significantly different from what we are today. In 1865, Jules Verne wrote a story about humans landing on the moon. And it was science fiction, pure science fiction, the best kind of science fiction. We're just imagining some kind of crazy future. You don't have the tools to make it happen, but you think, wouldn't it be neat? And I write science fiction. Wouldn't it be amazing if X could be possible? But in 1962, when President Kennedy gave his famous speech at Houston, that the United States was going to put a man on the moon in a decade, it wasn't science fiction. We had all of these technologies. We had missiles. We had the physics to do it. We hadn't put all of the pieces together exactly, but it wasn't some crazy guess. it was real. And with genetic technologies leading towards to the transformation of how we make babies, the nature of the babies we make, how we age, how we do many, many different things, this isn't 1865, it's 1962. We have all of the tools that we need to, over time, fundamentally transform our species. We haven't put all the pieces together, but we don't need to invent some new unimaginable technology in order to do these things, although we will, in fact, do that, in part because of the great work that you guys are doing at Google with artificial intelligence, and our collective intelligence as a species is going to get greater and greater and be more and more capable of driving technological change. But we have all of these tools now. And the way I like to make this concrete for people is to say that if you had a time machine, if we had a time machine and traveled 1,000 years into the past, and we took a baby from 1,000 years ago and brought that baby back to today and placed that child with a family, that child would be a normal kid just like anybody else at any school down the street here. But take the same time machine, travel 1,000 years into the future, take that kid and bring that kid back to today, and that kid would be a genetic Superman or Superwoman. They'd live longer. They'd be immune to lots of diseases. They wouldn't have the potential to have a lot of diseases. They'd be more intelligent, and we could go down the list of all of these things that child in the future is likely to have. And so how are we going to get from here to there? And it's a cliche, but we will get there in baby steps. And there are 3 technologies that already exist that are going to be driving this way forward. And the first one is IVF and in vitro fertilization and embryo selection. So IVF, when it started in the 1980s, was a revolutionary technology. When Louise Brown, the first so-called test tube baby, was born, there were people at that time who said this is an abomination, it's a crime against nature. But now everybody accepts, most people accept that IVF is a very, very legitimate way and an effective way to have children. On top of IVF, there is a procedure called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, PGD, or pre-implantation genetic selection, PGS. And what that basically means is in IVF, a woman has her eggs extracted. And the average number of eggs extracted in this process is about 15. Sometimes it's a bit more, sometimes it's a bit less, but that's the average. And in IVF and in IVF, then those eggs are fertilized by sperm. And the average male ejaculation, I guess we can say this at Google, has hundreds of millions of sperm, whereas the egg production, as I mentioned, is limited. So you fertilize however many eggs you have, or of those that can be fertilized. And let's just say you have 10 fertilized eggs. In PGD or PGS, what you do is you let those fertilized eggs grow to be 5-day-old zygotes, which are early stage embryos, and then you extract 2 cells from each of those, and then you screen those using genome sequencing. So just a little bit of an aside on genome sequencing. In 2003, when the Human Genome Project ended, it had taken 10 years, 13 years actually, and cost $1 billion. Today, we can sequence a genome in a couple of days, and it costs $1,000. Within 5 years, it's going to be around $50 and take hours, and after that, it's going to be even less and take minutes. And so what does it mean now that we are having, that in the process of PGD, we can screen using this low-cost genome sequencing? Well, today, it means that we can screen for a number of things. The easy and obvious ones for gender, for hair and eye color, and for single gene mutations, so-called Mendelian diseases. And you know what some of those are. It's Tay-Sachs, sickle cell disease, Huntington's. There's a long list of these. And so today, people, especially people undergoing high-risk pregnancies, either because of the age of the parents or because the parents may be carriers of some type of single gene mutation diseases, we can screen those embryos and decide which of the 10 to implant. But as more and more genomes are sequenced, we're going to know more and more about how the genome works, not just for single gene mutations, but for everything. I think all of you have heard about precision medicine or personalized medicine. And everyone kind of understands that it means that your medicine, your healthcare is going to be tailored to who you are. But what does that really mean? Well, it means that as one of the foundations of your medical record will be your sequenced genome. It'll be sequenced when you're a 5-day-old embryo. And as first millions, and then hundreds of millions, and then billions of people have their genome sequenced, and then we compare the genotype, what the genes say, and the phenotype of their life experience. How old were they when they got some kind of genetic diseases? How tall were they? What was their IQ? Did they win the Olympics in the 100 meters? Anything that would be influenced by genetics. We're going to know a lot more than just these single gene mutations on-off switches, which are relatively rare. We're going to be able to continue to use what's called a genome-wide association study to figure out how complex patterns of genes influence certain behaviors or traits. So now, in the process of IVF and PGD, we're going to know a lot. And so parents having a child, the first question that parents are going to ask is my child carrying some kind of terrible genetic disease? And everybody is going to want to know that. And that's why we're going to see a significant increase in people, even who don't have indications under the current structure, wanting to have kids, perfectly young and healthy people, wanting to have kids through IVF and PGD, because we're going to be able to screen out genetic diseases that nobody will want. In my last book, Genesis Code, one of the reasons why it was featured in Cosmo magazine is I was at a party in New York and I met the editor. And I said, hey, you should really do something on my book. And she said, well, what's it about? And I'd seen how they do titles in the grocery store. I said, well, it's about the end of sex. She goes, the end of sex, what does that mean? I said, well, my contention is that as people become more and more comfortable with embryo screening and recognize what embryo screening can do for the long-term health of their children, that more and more people are going to choose to conceive through IVF and embryo selection, and less people will conceive through traditional sex, ultimately leading to the end of sex for procreation, not for all the other wonderful reasons why people have sex, but not for procreation. I certainly think that is over coming decades, that is going to happen. It'll start with the more advantaged people in societies, but it will eventually trickle down. And why will it trickle down? Because societies bear a tremendous cost of providing lifetime care to people who are born with these genetic diseases. And some of these people live 80, 90 years and very meaningful lives. But if society wasn't paying those costs, and that you add up all of the costs of lifetime care for people with genetic diseases, and then so what would be the cost of screening the entire population to eliminate those diseases? And it's very tricky, because if people who already live, who have these diseases, it's not at all to say that your life isn't valued. It is. But if we had a choice as a society to eliminate terrible diseases that are killing people, for example, some diseases are killing people by the time they're 10 years old, and we could say we can guarantee that your kids won't have those diseases. Some people will say, well, it's God's plan, and we should just see what happens. But I think many other people will say, they're all my natural children. If I can choose one who doesn't have a terrible disease, I think I would do that. Once you've opened that door, once people are in the process of selecting their early stage embryos, then there's more information that's potentially available. Right now, we're right on the verge of being able to predict the height of a child based on the genetic screening when they're a 5-day-old embryo. Within a decade, and my friend Steve Hsu has done a lot of work on this, it's likely that we're going to be able to have a pretty good estimation, again, provided that the child gets proper health care and love and all those things, but a pretty good estimation of the future IQ of a child when that child is not a child, but a 5-day-old early stage embryo. So embryo selection is the first step in this transformation. The second step will be increasing the number of eggs and therefore increasing the range of choice. As I mentioned, the average woman having her eggs extracted has about 15 eggs. But what if we could increase that number to 100 or 1,000? Again, as I mentioned before, sperm is a dime a dozen. And so if you had, and so we can do that in animal studies now through induced pluripotent stem cells. So basically what you do is you take any kind of cell, but blood and skin cells are the easiest. So you take let's say a skin cell, you turn the skin cell into a stem cell, an induced stem cell, and then turn those induced stem cells, which can become anything, that's why they're stem cells, into egg cells, and egg cells into eggs. And now, instead of 15 eggs, you have 100, you have 1,000, let's call it 100. And then you use your hundreds of millions of sperm that you already have, you fertilize 100. And then you grow those to 5 days, you take out 2 cells from each of those 100, you sequence each of them, again, because by this time sequencing will cost almost nothing. And then you, instead of having 10 choices, you have 100 choices. And if in 100 kids, of your own natural kids, what's the range of IQs? What's the range of any kind of thing that you might select? And you'll have a little chart. And you'll say, well, we know that these 10 will definitely have Down syndrome, and these 5 may have Huntington's disease, and these 20 may have a high likelihood of being mathematical geniuses, whatever those things are. And in jurisdictions where this is legal, and it won't be in every jurisdiction, people will have the ability to make those choices. And as a society, I think we're more comfortable with making choices about health, but making choices about health and making choices about other traits will be the exact same process. So it will be a policy issue. It will be a personal choice issue, not a science issue, what information we'll all be able to have. And then the third phase of this, again, already underway, is using precision gene editing. I think everybody here has most likely heard of CRISPR. And CRISPR is this amazing new technology that allows scientists to edit the genome with a level of inexpensive simplicity that it would have been mind-boggling just a decade ago. And it's the equivalent of being at your computer with a Microsoft Word program, and you see a letter you want to change, you put the cursor there, and you eliminate that letter, and you can add another letter. So that's what we can do in the genome. We can make a double-strand cut in the genome, and we can either let it repair itself with just a missing space. We can add new DNA to fill that hole that's giving a different instruction to create a different protein. We can turn on a gene or turn off a gene. And so what will that mean? Well, it's incredible because it was only 3 years ago that scientists figured out how to use CRISPR to alter the DNA of a living cell. So 3 years. 2 years later, that's a tool. 2 years later was the advent of functional gene drives. And basically what gene drives does is it puts this tool, these molecular scissors, inside of the DNA of a sexually reproducing organism. And what it basically does is it can guarantee, and I can go into this later if anybody wants, but it can guarantee that a genetic trait becomes dominant from one parent. And so it means, let's just say that you have a fruit fly with light eyes and you want to push light eyes through the population. You just attach this molecular scissors so that when this one fruit fly mates with another fruit fly, it doesn't matter what the other fruit fly's genetics are, because the first fruit fly is passing this little tool, this little machine that's changing the second. And so it guarantees that you will have a specific genetic outcome. And now you have 2, and all of their kids won't just have that trait, they will also have the tool that is also reproducing within the cell. And so from one mosquito, you can transform an entire species. And that's why people are talking about gene drives as a potential way to wipe out Zika or malaria. The upside is you can wipe out Zika or malaria. The downside is if you get it wrong, you could wipe out all of life on Earth. That's the down. But one thing is clear is that, that precision gene editing is just going to fundamentally transform our world at all levels, on the plant level, on the animal level, and on the us level. And when people talk about different inventions in human history, when you think, well, what were the really, really big ones? Well, there was fire, There was harnessing steam power, maybe the internet. I mean, what are these things where you think it's not like inventing the glasses with the little hook that goes on your nose so it doesn't slip. That's a reference to a movie. I don't know if anyone saw it. No. All right. But CRISPR is, in the history of our species, it's a steam power level innovation. And just this week in Berkeley, actually not far from here, there was a new approach which it seems very, very likely will cure sickle cell disease that using CRISPR. And the power of gene editing is incredible. And a word of warning, though, about it is that I, for one, believe that humans are massively but not infinitely complex. We are single-cell organisms that have gone wild. And we know that we can understand pretty well how a single-cell organism functions. So if we can understand a single-cell organism conceptually, we should ultimately, over time, be able to understand ourselves. Right now, our level of complexity is far greater than our computing power and the power of our machines. But we are kind of at maybe a linear evolution, but our machines are at an exponential evolution. So there will come a time, and it will not be, it'll be definitely less than 100 years from now, probably less than 50 years from now, where our computers will be able to understand the complexity of the human body, including of the human brain, which is by far the most complex thing in the known universe now. So there's a lot that we don't know, and we need to be very, very careful, obviously, in messing with complex systems that we don't fully understand. And that's why I think that embryo selection will be the entry level, the starter drug, because you don't need to understand how the genome works to do embryo selection. You just have a guess. And because all of the kids are your own natural, unadulterated children, it can lead, people making those kinds of guesses can lead to some pretty significant changes across the population. This is a lot of background. My new novel, Eternal Sonata, is about extreme life extension. And it's the same curve. Like, we're going to be able to increasingly to understand the genetic foundation of extreme people who live longer. And we're going to be able to select against that. We already, as a result of our understanding of the genome, have new classes of drugs that can regulate the balance between cellular growth and cellular repair. Because if you're emphasizing repair, you can live longer. We have new nascent technologies for blood transfusions that share plasma and between younger and older mice and younger and older rats. And the older rats getting the younger blood become younger. Their skin is more supple, they remember things better. And the older and the younger mice getting the older blood transfused, they become slower. And so we're unlocking all of these new ways of hacking into the human system that is going to make all of these things that seemed fixed, especially our own biology, increasingly seem variable in the future. And the adoption rates of these technologies are going to normalize. Again, societies will have an interest in having healthier populations. When people feel it's safe, people will want to have healthier, maybe even more capable children than they otherwise would have had. If given the choice, people would like to live longer, healthier, more robust lives. And there'll be competition on many of these things, both within and between societies. That if you're in a society and somebody else is doing something that potentially will give their kids an advantage, will you not consider at least doing that for your kids? I spent a lot of time in Korea, and in Korea, people are spending 50% of their disposable outcome on tutors and education, on private education. They have their kids staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning every single night, year after year after year, to get just a small advantage over everybody else. There's this arms race. If people could make decisions before birth to give their kids advantage, would they do it? Maybe some would and some wouldn't. Maybe they would do it in some jurisdictions and not in others. But the history of our species is a history of hubris. And whatever it is, if there's name one technology that had the potential to do a lot of good and there were big dangers associated with it that we haven't adopted. We have, and that's our history. But there are huge and very, very challenging issues And if we just say, well, this is just technology and technology will find a way, we'll have a disaster on our hands. Because as I think all of you are thinking and all of you watching on the screen are thinking, there are massive issues of equity, of diversity. Our survival as a species has been based on our diversity. And at any one time, there are people who seemed like they weren't really contributing much, who, when the world changed, those were the people who led to this, our salvation as groups or as a species. And that's true with any organism. And so if we were to make selections and limit the diversity of our species, we would do that at our own peril. And there are huge values issues. And many of us come from ancient traditions that have very meaningful, valuable codes of justice and honor and good behavior. And we can't just throw those away. Those are hard-won gains that our ancestors have fought for to try to figure out how to live in communities where people respect one another. And just because there's new technology doesn't mean that we shouldn't think of what's the best of our tradition, what's the best of our values, and deploy them to help us navigate this new and very complicated terrain. So that finally brings me to the issue of the novel and why I write novels. As I said at the outset, these are very, very complex. They're very, very difficult issues. And they're the kind of issues, they're human issues. And we, as a species, we don't just respond to science. We don't just respond to policy memos. Our history as a species is that we respond to stories. It's how we've lived. We tell stories around the campfire. It's how we struggle with things, and we have parables. And for me, I certainly have been working on these issues for many, many years, and I've written a lot of articles who people like the people I know read, but this is such a fundamental issue that it's a species-wide issue. And everybody needs to be part of the conversation about our future evolution and the implications, the big picture implications of today's technologies. And that's why I've written the book, and then I'll just tell a little bit about the book and then just read you a very, very short bit, and then would love to get your thoughts and answer any questions. So the premise behind the book is that octogenarian, brilliant scientists dying of terminal cancer are disappearing from hospices around the world. And nobody notices and nobody really cares because these people are very old and near death. But one reporter from the Kansas City Star begins investigating one disappearance and starts piecing together that there are these other disappearances around the world. And that investigation leads him to a very reclusive scientist whose wife had died of cancer 10 years before, and he's committed himself to trying to find a cure for cancer. And he finds a way to reverse age, to revert cancer cells to their precancerous state. And he's all excited about it, and it works in animal models. But when he tries it in humans, the complexity of the body's response rejects this cellular transformation. So he experiments and experiments, and he stumbles upon a way of reverting all of the cells in the body to create an environment where the cancer can be reverted. And of course, what this means is that he's conquered aging. And he realizes what he's done and how dangerous the concept of immortality has been for people for so many millennia. And he realizes that he needs to protect this knowledge. And so he compartmentalizes his research to try to make sure it doesn't get into the wrong hands. And then he's murdered. Not to spoil it, but that happens early in the novel. So, and then he's murdered, which launches a global struggle to find and control the technology enabling extreme human life extension and immortality. So it's a thriller because I just feel like what I want people to do, I want people to be able to explore these issues in a way that's fun and interesting and hopefully exciting. And it's a love story. There's sex, but I can't say I did a very good job at it. But you guys be the judge. And maybe I'll just read you just a little bit just to get a sense of things. So this is chapter 26. Compared to the vast expanse of the 4.5 billion years of this planet, or the nearly 4 billion years it took life to morph from a single-cell organism into the 100 trillion or so cells I lug around today, each of our presences is but a blip. Blip actually is too strong a word. We're a pimple on the nose of a speck joyriding on the blip's ass. In other words, we are small. But each of us is the hero of our own little play, endowed with enough narcissism to believe our lives, our presence here on Earth during the estimated 5 billion more years our blue marble has left to twirl somehow counts. Faced with death 2 years ago in a musty hotel room in Norman, Oklahoma, I realized that as small as our lives may be in the grand scheme of things, loving another person is our tiny ripple in the universe, our song into the vastness of space announcing the inexplicable artistry of our one true creation greater than ourselves. But over the past 2 years, I've gradually lost hold of this insight. Perpetually overthinking life, I seem to have reverted to my ongoing dialectical battle between, and I'll be the first to roll my eyes whenever Jean-Paul Sartre is referenced, being and nothingness. In the last 3 days, I've learned of 2 men's disappearances into thin air, come across the body of a genius I'd just met being grotesquely devoured by jellyfish, spoiler alert, and essentially witnessed the deaths of 2 police officers caught in a massive explosion. No wonder my grip on reality, whatever that strange concept actually means, is feeling tenuous as I pull into Tony's driveway. Tony is his girlfriend. She's running back and forth in the kitchen, waving her arms as I enter the door from the garage. An easy smile blankets her face. "Come on, Sebastian, come on," she says in her silly baby voice. The dog leaps in circles with delight. "Look who it is," she says to the dog in the same voice. "It's Daddy." I turn as if to see if someone is standing behind me. Tony seems to forgive my poor attempt at humor and crawls toward me. She swats my left shoe back and forth, which the dog recognizes as placing my foot on the edible list. Sebastian darts in with what looks like an irrepressible smile, and I'm reminded, as if I need reminding, which I probably sometimes do, just how special Tony is. Anyway, so it's written, my hope is, I was in Washington for a lot of years and was on the National Security Council, and a lot of my friends wrote novels that were like policy memos with a murder and a sex scene. And so I'm hoping that this is a bit better than that. But it's such a tremendous honor for me to meet with any number, even one, of people who are reading my book. Because as an author, it's such a personal experience. You have all of your kind of thoughts and your life, and eventually you kind of think up a story, and then you kind of gather your soul, and you kind of condense it, and then all of a sudden, it becomes this physical object. And then it has a life in the world that is separate from you, and people consume it as a product, and your little piece of your soul, hopefully, ideally, enters them. And so what I hope is that I hope you'll read the book, I hope you'll enjoy the book, and if it just inspires you to think a little bit differently or a little bit more about any of these issues or any other issues, then for me that's success. So it's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Can you talk a bit about yourself, your experience? And it seems that you have traveled to many countries.
Yes.
Yes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So just a little bit about me. This is the condensed version of my life. But I'm originally from Kansas City. But in my freshman year at Brown, this is connected to traveling to a lot of countries, I met a classmate of mine who was a survivor of the Cambodian genocide. And I was so blown away by his life experience that that summer I quit my job on the first day and had a garage sale of all the junk in my parents' house and bought a ticket and went to the Thai-Cambodian border and got very, very involved working in a refugee camp. And then came back and was very deeply involved in Asia and international relations. And after my PhD in law school, then I was in US government on the National Security Council and the State Department and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And my idea was that those kinds of problems and the problems that we see now in Syria and other places, that the refugee is the end of the tail. The beginning of the tail, or the head of the animal, is bad decisions by leaders. And so that certainly I have a long history in government, because it's a big, I don't know if a commitment is the right word, but just a belief that we all have an important role to play. both in helping our leaders make good decisions, but also, and this comes back to my novel writing, in educating ourselves and educating each other on what the big issues are so that we can be informed and make smart decisions, and we can inspire our leaders, knock wood, to make smart decisions as well.
So how much embryo selection or even gene editing before the embryo selection would it take to be evolution? You use that term.
It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. It's a great question, and I think that we'll know it when we just start seeing the differences. I mean, I think that we're always evolving. We're a constantly evolving species. But we're going to see people jumping out of the range of what we now consider normal. And whether it's living longer right now, this is a quiz, how old was the oldest person who's ever lived? 122. Yes, 122. And she was a smoker. She smoked her whole life. To live such a long time, it's actually lifestyle isn't that important. I mean, to live to 95, lifestyle is really important. But to get to 110, you just have to thank your parents. But we're going to see people jumping out of the range of normal. And I think that is going to be one easy indication that when we have more and more people who have beyond genius IQs, who are living longer, when we're eliminating diseases. And again, not every change is good. I talked about this cure for sickle cell disease, this prospective cure for sickle cell disease. The reason sickle cell disease has survived is that it's a bad thing to have, but it also gives many people immunity to malaria. And so there are a lot of genes that do multiple things. It's not that every gene does one thing. And there's a lot of complexity. So I don't have a clear way of answering, but we're going to have a lot of people in the not distant future jumping out of the range of normal, and that's going to be relatively easy to identify.
To what extent have you thought about, and to what extent do you go into in the book some of the economic implications? Because I see both short-term, where better differentiable embryos can potentially become better differentiable economic assets, and long-term, where things like a 200-year-old person, compounded interest in their accounts, economically differentiates them substantially more than someone newly entering the workforce. So how much have you thought about that? What are your thoughts? How much do you go into it?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it. The prequel to Eternal Sonata is Genesis Code, where I focus more about your first question. So there'll be huge implications, both for competition between societies. There'll be big economic implications. So on the economic sense, we're going to eliminate diseases, and that's going to help. But we're going to be a lot more competitive between the enhancements of the human brain, which I think are coming, and the work that you all are doing, the brain-computer interface. We're going to be inventing things that we can't even imagine, and our inventions are going to be inventing things. So I think I've definitely thought a lot about that. In terms of the implications of people living longer, we have all of these systems that are based on one expectation of how long people live. And already, with Social Security as a good example, we're seeing the strains when our early assumptions are no longer correct. And we're going to have more and more of that. And it's actually a good thing to do now. It's like if you have a lot of faith, as I do, that we're going to be living much longer than was the model. There are like some pretty smart investments. Definitely everybody should be putting into your retirement account now. But it's just all of these things that are axiomatic, and that's what I started with. Like it's kind of axiomatic to us that the human body isn't that hackable, but it turns out it is hackable. And it's axiomatic that you live within a certain range of life. But it was also at earlier stages of not just evolution, of human existence. Not too long ago, the expectation was much shorter than it is now. So we're going to grow and expand. But if you want to make a smart investment, just assume, which I think is a fair investment, that you guys, everyone in this room, is going to live longer than the actual actuarial tables would suggest. And then why? Well, if you're thinking that, what are the investments that you can make? And of course, the answer is buy more Google stock.
I have a question about policy and morality. Since after you've worked in DC for a while, where does policy come into this? Because I know a lot of times with technology, policy kind of comes after the fact. Like with Uber as an example, and like when you're talking about picking genes and picking genders, like we need to have an equal balance of genders. But obviously, in many countries, they would favor male
Right.
embryo. So
It's like that's like the dumbest thing ever. My thing is, if you want to have national competitiveness, pick women. You're much better off. But yeah, no, it's a great question. And this is the problem with a lot of technologies is the technology is advancing exponentially. But our mindset, as I mentioned before, is only increasing linearly. And the regulatory environment is only inching forward glacially. And that's why there's such a dangerous mismatch. And we've seen what happens when there's a mismatch. The GMO debate is a case in point. 30 years of research has proven inconclusively that there's nothing more dangerous about GMO crops than regular crops. And yet, because the information battle has been lost, people just have a feeling that GM crops are unnatural. And there may be other legit criticisms like monoculture and corporate control. But in terms of safety, really GM crops, there's nothing that, at least that's been proven thus far, that's wrong with them. But once it gets stuck in people's minds that there's something bad, it's very, very hard to move them. And that's the moment that we're in right now with all of these technologies. And that's why I'm pushing for and trying to create a species-wide dialogue on the future of human genetic engineering, because now people's minds haven't formed, and there's an opportunity to bring people into an inclusive conversation, inclusive global dialogue that includes people of faith and people from the civil society groups, people from the corporate world, just from anywhere and everywhere. But in relatively soon, those things are going to form. And there's a danger of under-regulation because what we're talking about is life. In life, there must be limits on how people can manipulate life. It's just unacceptable. And there are some people who are in the transhumanist community, and they live around here, who say there should just be no limits, let science do what it will. But I don't think that's a morally defensible position. Having said that, there needs to be a high level of permissiveness because one, if the technology can help cure disease and enhance life, it will find a way, whether in one jurisdiction or another. And that we need to create an environment where this technology can thanks guys, where the technology can realize its potential. But there's a big mismatch, and that's why the public we need to educate ourselves, and we need to educate our leaders, and we need to make sure that we're neither under-regulated nor over-regulated, and that's a very tall order.
You talk about how good it is to live longer, right? Mm-hmm. But there should be a bad side of that, right? Like if you live longer, then it's supposed to be more than 100 years. Maybe you will live 150 years, right? What will happen with the world, right? Will be so many people already there, all the resources, and some of them maybe don't desire to live that longer. So what about that? Your genes are modified to live longer. What if the person doesn't want to live longer?
So there's two great questions. I'll start with the second one. If you are an existentialist, and I mentioned Sartre, then living every day is an affirmative choice. And so if people don't want to live longer, I don't encourage this, and life is wonderful, everyone should live to be 1,000. But people can make whatever personal choice, but don't do it. Life is great. If you're thinking about that, change your perspective. But on the thing of overpopulation, that's an issue I get asked every time, and I'm not at all concerned about it. Just because when you look at population trends now, we're moving towards 9 billion people in about 2050. But then, forgetting all of this, then the global population is going to start going down pretty significantly. And the biggest reason for that is education. Right now we have big pockets of the world of people who are not as well educated as elsewhere. But that will change, and that's going to change over coming decades. And when you have every society that becomes highly educated stops having kids. And so the replacement rates in most everywhere, in Korea, in Japan, in Singapore, in most of Europe, it's below 2 children per mother. And the people, at least in the beginning, who are going to be having access to these technology will be people in that same class of people who have access to modernity. So I'm not concerned. And I also feel that we as a species, we have the resources now easily to feed everybody on Earth, to clothe everybody on Earth, to house everybody on Earth. We've made a moral decision that we don't want to do it. We've made a moral decision that we are comfortable with concentrating resources in some places and letting people starve to death or live in extremely unsanitary conditions elsewhere. But today, what's the difference between the life experience of everybody in this room and the average person in the Central African Republic in the middle of a horrendous civil war, or the people in Haiti whose lives have been wrecked 10 times over the last decade? And so I definitely think that there's a moral imperative for us to think about equity issues today. But I don't think that having people living longer, I don't think that as long as we have good values, that's going to put a significant strain on the planet. But I could be proven wrong. I mean, if everybody has it and people have more kids, I mean, things change all the time.
Could you speak as an author about the process of going from a very society level, global level vision of the future to a more isolated story with a specific plot? A couple of
So it's a great question, and for me, and it's personal, so I don't know how other people do it, but for me, there'll be a big idea, and I'll be thinking about it. I'll often write articles about a big idea, and then I'll start thinking, well, what would it mean? Like for my last book, Genesis Code, I testified before Congress on the national security implications of the genetics revolution. And then I started writing a book that I didn't finish, but it was a nonfiction book on exactly that topic. And I was writing the preface. And in the preface, I talked about a national security staffer. I imagined a national security staffer briefing the president, saying, Mr. President, we've learned that China has a secret genetic enhancement program where they're breeding super babies and placing them in the equivalent of their Olympic sports schools, but for science and math and engineering and business. And the president says, well, what does it mean? And the staffer says, well, it means that in 30 years, if they do it and we don't, we won't be able to compete with them. And so, well, what are our options? Well, we decided there's nothing we can do to stop them, but we can't do it ourselves because we have all these legal and political and cultural issues. And what can we do? Well, we have this idea that if we purchase a small chain of fertility clinics and begin seeding the population with genetically enhanced babies, nobody's going to know, and parents are going to be so excited that their kid is a genius or a sports star or whatever. So that was where I started with and then I threw away the book, and I thought, well, this is what I want to write. And then I would imagine, well, how would it happen if a genetically modified person showed up? How would we experience that? And then it's just like, it's like little bits. It's like building with Legos. And then you kind of take these little pieces from your life. And there's the same with Eternal Sonata. I was thinking a lot about life extension. Well, what's it going to mean? Because all of these technologies, they build and they build and they build. And then for people, like one day you have an interaction. Like one day, I guarantee you, your company is going to create human experience artificial intelligence. So everybody is going to have, everyone in this room, in your lifetime, you're going to have one day where you're just, whatever the vehicle is, whether it's a robot or your car or something, but you're going to be having a conversation with artificial intelligence in your lifetime. And you're going to think like, oh my God, I forgot it was artificial intelligence. I thought I've been talking about philosophy on the 101 for 20 minutes. And I forgot it was artificial intelligence. You're all going to have that experience. And think, well, when you have that experience, what's it going to mean to you as a human being? How are you going to think about your future differently? And so for me, I think a lot about these questions. And then I think, well, how can you turn it into stories and turn it into characters and have the characters, as I read you that piece, and I not have characters being kind of wooden representations, but real characters with lives. And that's one of the things that I like about fiction is you kind of create the characters, and then the characters develop a life of their own, and they do things that surprise you. I mean, I guess it's you doing things that surprise you, but because they pick up life, and it's like a magnet picking up little shavings.
What other works would you say influenced your current work?
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
What inspired you? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny, as a science fiction writer, I mean, it's near-term science fiction, I don't primarily read science fiction. I like it when I read it, but I love literature. And I certainly, I have a lot of writers who I like. One writer who I really love, who I reference a lot in the book, is Jorge Luis Borges. I highly recommend it. It's a short book, although you could read it 1,000 times and learn something new every time, called Ficciones, Ficciones. So Borges is a big inspiration. Yasunori Kawabata, who's a Japanese Nobel laureate. What I really love about him is it's like I'm 1,000 years away from him, but just like the purity of the words, the purity of the language. So I have a lot of different writers who I really like. But what I try to do is draw from a lot of different places and then try to infuse it with some of my own voice.
If any of your works were to be optioned into something animated or live action, who would you want to team up with?
Oh, that's a great question. So the question, I'm going to answer that and another question because I am it's a little bit of a fantasy, but with all my novels, I think, well, this should definitely, because when you write a book, everybody you know says, this should definitely be a movie, and you should be on Oprah. And there's 200,000 books that come out every year in English, and every person's friends tell them that, and then they say, like, why weren't you on Oprah? Like, what's wrong with you? So anyway, but having said all of that, I definitely would love for this to be a made movie, and I've cast all the roles, and Adrian Brody plays the main character. And so for who to make it, I wouldn't imagine it as an animation, just because the whole reason I write near-term fiction is I want this to feel to people like it's the world today. Like I don't want people to feel it's space opera. I don't need any Wookiees or people feel that. I want people to think like, this is me, this is my life. And I'm going to LA in 2 days, and anyone who'll take me, I'd be happy to I'd be happy to have. So anyway, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.